I became a duchess the day I stopped being myself. That was 5 years ago, and I have been a stranger in my own home ever since. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Harrogate Manor with a coldness that matched everything else in this house. I stood in the conservatory, my fingers trailing across the petals of a white camellia, feeling the delicate texture that seemed too fragile for this world of stone and ceremony. This was my refuge, the only place where I felt I could breathe without the weight of my title pressing down on my chest like an iron corset laced too tight. I was not born to this life. My father was a country gentleman of modest means, our estate small but well-loved, our dinners simple but warm. I grew up with dirt under my fingernails from helping in the garden, with laughter that echoed through rooms not large enough to swallow the sound. When the Duke of Harrogate's family approached mine with a marriage proposal, my mother wept with what she believed was joy. An advantageous match, they called it. A miracle for a girl of my standing. I was 19 years old and foolish enough to believe that marriage might bring something more than an arrangement of names on paper and the joining of properties on a map. The Duke was 30 then, already weathered by whatever sorrows had shaped him into the silent, distant man who would become my husband. I remember seeing him for the first time at our engagement dinner, his dark eyes passing over me with the same attention one might give to a new piece of furniture, assessing whether it would suit the decor. He was handsome in the way that cold marble statues are handsome, all sharp lines and aristocratic features that revealed nothing of what lay beneath. His voice, when he spoke to me, was polite and empty, as though he were reading from a script he had memorized but never believed in. We were married 6 weeks later in a ceremony that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. I wore white silk that cost more than my family's annual income, and I smiled until my face ached because that was what was expected of the new Duchess of Harrogate. That night, in the enormous bedchamber that I would come to know too well, my husband performed his duty with the same mechanical efficiency he brought to everything else. When it was over, he dressed and left without a word, and I lay alone in that vast bed, staring at the canopy above me and wondering if this emptiness was what they meant by marital bliss. The years that followed taught me the true architecture of loneliness. It is not the absence of people, but the presence of those who look through you as though you are made of glass. The servants were respectful but distant, trained by generations of service to maintain the proper boundaries between themselves and the family. The Duke's mother, the Dowager Duchess, had died 2 years before our marriage, leaving behind only portraits and the lingering scent of disapproval that seemed to seep from the very walls. My husband spent his days managing the estate, his evenings in his study, and his nights wherever it was that men like him went when they could no longer bear the sight of their wives. I tried in those early months to be what I thought a duchess should be. I learned to walk differently, to hold my head at the correct angle, to speak in the measured tones that would not betray my country origins. I memorized the names of every family in the peerage, their histories and connections, their scandals and triumphs. I sat through endless dinner parties where the conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, never quite touching. I smiled and nodded and said the appropriate things, and all the while I felt myself disappearing, becoming less Eleanor and more simply the Duchess, a title without a person inside it. It was in the conservatory that I found something resembling peace. The previous Duchess had been an avid gardener, and the glass structure at the east end of the manor housed an impressive collection of exotic plants and flowers. After her death, the Duke had largely abandoned it, and the head gardener, an elderly man named Mr. Whitmore, seemed grateful to have someone show interest again. He taught me the names of the orchids and ferns, the proper way to water the delicate blooms, the secrets of coaxing life from soil and seed. Here, among the green growing things, I could forget for a little while that I was a failure as a wife, a disappointment as a duchess, a woman whose own husband could barely stand to look at her. Mr. Whitmore never asked questions. never pried into why the young Duchess spent so many hours alone among the plants. He simply shared his knowledge and his quiet companionship, and I was grateful for both. He told me once that plants were honest in a way that people often were not. They showed you exactly what they needed, and if you paid attention, they would thrive. If you ignored them, they would wither. There was no pretense, no social games, no complex rules about what one could or could not say. I found this notion comforting, even as I recognized the bitter irony. I had been watered and fed and given every material comfort, and yet I was withering all the same. The whispers began sometime during the 2nd year of our marriage. I heard them in fragments, caught like spider webs in the corners of rooms when I entered too quickly. The Duke has a particular friend, Lady Genevieve Cavendish. You remember her, of course. Such a beauty, such a tragedy about her husband. The Viscount, yes, thrown from his horse not 2 years into their marriage, left her a wealthy widow. They say she and the Duke were quite close before his unfortunate marriage. I learned to keep my face perfectly still when I heard these whispers, to betray nothing of the sick feeling that would rise in my throat. Lady Genevieve Cavendish was everything I was not. She was beautiful in the way that stops conversation when she enters a room, with golden hair that caught the light like spun silk and eyes the color of summer sky. She had been born into one of the oldest families in England, her bloodline impeccable, her manners beyond reproach, and she had been, according to the whispers, the woman my husband had truly wanted to marry. The story came to me in pieces over the months. The Duke and Lady Genevieve had been childhood friends, their families' estates neighboring one another. There had been an understanding between them, everyone said, a promise that they would marry when she came of age. But her father, ambitious and impatient, had arranged her marriage to Viscount Cavendish instead, a man 20 years her senior with twice the wealth of the Duke. She had obeyed, as young women of her class always obeyed, and within 2 years she was a widow. By then, my husband's family had decided that he needed to marry, and they had chosen me, the country girl with no connections but a respectable name and a father desperate enough to accept their terms. I saw her for the first time at a ball 3 months after my wedding. She glided through the ballroom like something from a dream, her gown a confection of pale blue silk that made her look like she was floating on clouds. I watched from my position beside my husband as she approached us, her smile warm and her greeting perfectly calculated to be both friendly and just slightly condescending. "Your Grace, how wonderful to finally meet you. I have heard so much about you." The emphasis she placed on heard made it clear that what she had heard was not particularly flattering. She turned to my husband then, and I saw something pass between them, a look that lasted only a moment but felt like an eternity. There was history in that look, and longing, and a familiarity that made my stomach clench with something I was not yet ready to call jealousy. From that night forward, Lady Genevieve became a permanent fixture in our lives. She was invited to every dinner party, every social gathering, every event of importance. She always arrived looking impossibly lovely, always had the wittiest conversation, always knew exactly how to make everyone in the room feel privileged by her presence. And she always made a point of speaking to me with a kindness that felt like cruelty, asking after my health, complimenting my gown in a way that somehow made it clear that my dress was hopelessly provincial compared to hers, inquiring about my family with a sweet smile that barely concealed her disdain for my humble origins. The Duke never defended me against these subtle attacks. In fact, he seemed barely aware that they were happening. When Lady Genevieve was present, he came alive in a way I had never seen before. His face lost some of its hardness. His voice warmed. His laughter came more easily. He would stand near her, not too close, but close enough that I could see the way his body angled toward hers, like a flower turning toward the sun. And I would stand beside him, the dutiful wife, smiling and nodding and dying inside. It was Mr. Whitmore who first told me about the orchids. We were in the conservatory on a gray afternoon in early spring, and he was showing me a new specimen that had just bloomed, a rare variety with petals the color of cream and burgundy. Beautiful things, orchids, he said, but temperamental. They require very specific conditions to thrive. Lady Cavendish has quite the collection at Cavendish Hall, they say, particularly the Phalaenopsis. Won several prizes at the Royal Horticultural Society exhibitions. She is preparing something special for the annual flower exhibition this June, I hear. I remember feeling a small spark of interest, the first I had felt about anything social in months. The annual flower exhibition was one of the grandest events of the London season, held in the enormous glass pavilion at the Horticultural Society Gardens. The finest families displayed their most impressive blooms, competing for prizes and prestige. It was as much about showing off one's status as it was about the flowers themselves, a chance to demonstrate not just wealth but taste and cultivation. "What is she preparing?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mr. Whitmore gave me a careful look, as though weighing how much to tell me. "A display of rare orchids," he said finally. "Varieties she has been cultivating for years. The centerpiece is supposed to be a cluster of Dendrobium noble, white with purple throats. Very difficult to grow in England's climate. They say it will be the finest display at the exhibition. She is rather proud of it." Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. He was not meeting my eyes, his gaze fixed on the orchid in front of us. I understood then that he was trying to tell me something without saying it directly, protecting himself with the careful language of a servant who knew his place. "Does the Duke know about this display?" I asked quietly. "I believe His Grace is quite familiar with Lady Cavendish's gardens," Mr. Whitmore said. "He visits Cavendish Hall regularly. To advise on horticultural matters, of course." "Of course," I echoed, and my voice sounded strange even to my own ears, hollow and distant. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in my solitary bed and stared at the darkness, my mind replaying every interaction I had witnessed between my husband and Lady Genevieve, every look and smile and carefully chosen word. I thought about the visits to Cavendish Hall, the horticultural advice, the rare orchids being prepared for public display. I thought about how little my husband spoke to me, how he barely looked at me, how I had somehow become invisible in my own marriage. And I thought about the annual flower exhibition, just 3 months away, where Lady Genevieve would stand in triumph with her precious orchids, and I would stand in the crowd, like everyone else, watching her glory and smiling until my face cracked. I rose from bed and went to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. The grounds of Harrogate stretched out before me in the moonlight, acres of carefully manicured gardens and ancient trees. All of this belonged to my husband, and by extension to me, and yet I felt like a trespasser, an intruder who had wandered into someone else's life and could not find the way out. It was in that moment, standing alone in the darkness, that something inside me shifted. I had spent 5 years trying to become the Duchess everyone expected me to be, shrinking myself down to fit into a role that was never meant for me. I had accepted the coldness and the loneliness and the humiliation, had convinced myself that this was simply the way things were, that I had no right to expect more. But standing there, thinking about Lady Genevieve and her perfect orchids and the way my husband's face lit up when he looked at her, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt angry. It was a small spark at first, easily ignored, but it grew as the days passed. I began to pay closer attention to the whispers and the looks, to the way conversation would stop when I entered a room and resume when I left. I learned that my husband visited Cavendish Hall at least twice a week, that he stayed for hours, that Lady Genevieve's servants had been instructed to treat him with the deference usually reserved for the master of the house. I discovered that there were letters passed between them with a frequency that suggested far more than a casual friendship. And I realized that everyone knew. The servants knew. The social circle knew. Even the merchants in the village knew. The only person who had been foolish enough not to see what was happening was me. The annual flower exhibition loomed ahead like a test I had not studied for. Lady Genevieve spoke of it constantly, her excitement barely contained, dropping hints about her magnificent display and how it would certainly win the grand prize. She would smile at me sweetly and say things like, "You must come see it, Your Grace. I know you have an interest in flowers. Perhaps you might learn something." And I would smile back and murmur something appropriate, all the while feeling that spark of anger burning a little brighter. I spent more time in the conservatory, learning everything Mr. Whitmore could teach me about orchids and their care. I studied books on horticulture, memorizing Latin names and growing conditions, understanding the delicate balance required to make these temperamental plants thrive. Mr. Whitmore seemed to understand what I was doing, though we never spoke of it directly. He showed me the rarest specimens in our collection, explained their histories, taught me to see the subtle differences between varieties that looked similar to an untrained eye. One afternoon in early May, as we were examining a particularly fine cattleya, he said quietly, "The Dendrobium Lady Cavendish is preparing for the exhibition are indeed remarkable, but they are not the only rare orchids in England. We have several specimens here that are equally impressive, perhaps even more so." I looked at him, my heart beginning to beat faster. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Whitmore?" He was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands gentle on the orchid before us. "I am suggesting nothing, Your Grace. I am merely observing that you are the Duchess of Harrogate, and these conservatories belong to you. What you choose to do with their contents is entirely your decision. But if you were to decide to prepare a display for the exhibition, I would be honored to assist you." And there it was. The possibility of action, of response, of refusing to remain invisible and silent while my husband's mistress paraded her victory in front of all of society. I could attend the exhibition as I had planned, stand in the crowd and watch and smile, or I could step into the light myself, claim my place, make them all see me. I thought about Eleanor Ashford, the girl I had been before I became a duchess, the girl who had laughed too loud and gotten dirt under her nails and believed in happy endings. I thought about what she would do, that girl who had not yet learned to make herself small. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," I said, and my voice was steady and clear. "I would very much like your help in preparing a display, something truly extraordinary." He smiled then, a rare expression on his usually solemn face. "Very good, Your Grace. I believe we have exactly what we need." As I left the conservatory that evening, the sun was setting over the gardens, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. I felt something I had not felt in 5 years, something I had almost forgotten was possible. I felt like myself again, like Eleanor, not just the Duchess, but the woman underneath the title. And I felt afraid, because I was about to do something that could not be undone, something that would force everyone to see me, including my husband. But more than afraid, I felt alive. The exhibition was 4 weeks away. The work consumed me in a way nothing had in years. Every morning I woke with purpose, rising before dawn to spend hours in the conservatory before the household fully stirred. Mr. Whitmore and I became conspirators in our own quiet rebellion, selecting the finest specimens, nurturing them with careful attention, planning a display that would rival anything Lady Genevieve could produce. The orchids we chose were magnificent. We had cattleya with blooms as large as my hand, their petals a deep magenta that seemed to glow in the light. We had phalaenopsis in pristine white, cascading like small butterflies frozen in flight. But our prize, the centerpiece of our display, was a cluster of Vanda coerulea, the blue orchid, so rare that most people had only seen them in illustrations. The previous Duchess had acquired them years ago from a botanist who had traveled to India, and they had thrived in our conservatory's careful climate. Their color was extraordinary, a pure sky blue that seemed impossible in nature, and their fragrance was delicate and sweet, like spring rain on flowers. No one else knows we have these, Mr. Whitmore told me one morning as we examined the blooms. The late Duchess kept them rather private. She showed them only to a select few. Lady Cavendish certainly does not know they exist. I touched one of the petals gently, marveling at its perfection. They are beautiful, I said. Almost too beautiful to be real. They are real enough, Your Grace. And they are yours to do with as you please. I understood what he was not saying. These orchids were a secret, a weapon I could choose to use or keep hidden. Displaying them would not just challenge Lady Genevieve's supremacy, it would shock everyone who thought they knew what Harrowgate Manor contained. It would force people to look at me, to see that the quiet, unremarkable Duchess they had dismissed for 5 years had been hiding something extraordinary all along. But more than that, it would hurt Lady Genevieve. She had built her reputation on being the finest horticulturist in society, on having access to the rarest and most beautiful specimens. To be upstaged by me, the woman she had spent years subtly mocking, the country girl who barely understood how to dress properly, let alone cultivate exotic flowers, would be a humiliation she could not ignore. I should have felt guilty about wanting to hurt her. A proper lady, a true Duchess, would rise above such petty feelings. But I was tired of being proper. I was tired of rising above. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of what I had felt for 5 years, watching her claim what should have been mine. "We will use them," I said firmly, right in the center of our display. Mr. Whitmore nodded, satisfied. "Very good, Your Grace. They will need special care in these final weeks. I will prepare them myself." As he worked, I found myself watching him with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. He was an old man, his face weathered by decades of outdoor work, his hands gnarled but still steady. He had served the Ashford family for most of his life, had known my husband as a boy, had worked for the previous Duchess until her death. Yet he had chosen to help me, to take my side in this unspoken war. I wondered if he disapproved of my husband's behavior, or if he simply felt sorry for me. Perhaps it was both. "Do you think I am being foolish, Mr. Whitmore?" I asked one afternoon, "caring so much about flowers and exhibitions when there are more important matters to attend to?" He was quiet for a long moment, his attention focused on the plant before him. Then he said, "I think, Your Grace, that sometimes the things that seem small are the only battles we can actually win. The large matters, the important ones as you call them, are often beyond our control. But flowers, exhibitions, the way we choose to present ourselves to the world, these are things we can shape with our own hands. There is no shame in fighting the battles we can fight." I felt tears prick my eyes at his words, unexpected and sharp. "Thank you," I said softly. He nodded, not looking at me, giving me the privacy to compose myself. We continued our work in comfortable silence, and I felt something settle in my chest, a sense of rightness that I had not experienced in a very long time. The preparations took over my life entirely. I began to neglect my other duties, the endless social calls and needlework and correspondence that had filled my empty days. When invitations arrived for tea or luncheon, I sent polite refusals, claiming a slight indisposition. The truth was that I could not bear to sit in drawing rooms and make small talk while my mind was consumed with soil composition and temperature regulation, and the exact angle at which we should position our display to catch the best light. My husband noticed my absence, though he did not seem particularly troubled by it. One evening at dinner, one of the rare occasions when we actually ate together, he looked up from his plate and said, "I hear you have been declining social engagements. Are you unwell?" It was not said with concern, merely observation, the way one might note that the weather had turned cold or that the soup needed salt. I met his eyes across the expansive mahogany table that separated us, seeing nothing in his face but polite inquiry. "I am quite well," I replied. "I have been occupied with other matters." "Other matters," he repeated, his tone suggesting that he could not imagine what matters a woman like me might have that would require such attention. I am preparing a display for the annual flower exhibition, I said, keeping my voice level. Mr. Whitmore has been assisting me. Something flickered in his expression then, too quick to identify. Surprise, perhaps, or annoyance. I see, he said. I was not aware you had an interest in horticulture. The conservatory has been my refuge for some time, I said, and I heard the edge in my own voice, the hint of accusation. Since you are so often occupied elsewhere. He had the grace to look away then, his jaw tightening slightly. I have responsibilities, Eleanor. The estate does not manage itself. Of course not, I said. Just as I have responsibilities to attend to our conservatory and represent our family at important social events, I assume you will attend the exhibition. I had not planned to, he said. Such events are tedious. Lady Cavendish will be there, I said, and watched his face carefully. I understand she has prepared quite an impressive display. His expression shifted again, this time unmistakably. There was interest there, and something else, something that looked almost like longing. Yes, he said quietly. She has been working very hard on it. The orchids are supposed to be extraordinary. I felt that now familiar anger flare in my chest, hot and bitter. I am sure they are, I said. Though I hope our own display will prove equally noteworthy. Our display, he said, and there was something almost like amusement in his tone now, as though the idea of me competing with Lady Genevieve was absurd. Well, I wish you luck with it. He returned his attention to his dinner, effectively dismissing me, and I sat there gripping my fork too tightly, feeling the weight of 5 years of accumulated hurt pressing down on me. I wanted to scream at him, to demand why he had married me if he loved another woman, why he had condemned us both to this cold, empty existence. But I said nothing, because I had learned that words changed nothing, that my husband heard only what he wanted to hear and saw only what he wanted to see. But he would see me at the exhibition, whether he wanted to or not. The weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The blue orchids flourished under Mr. Whitmore's care, their blooms growing fuller and more vibrant with each passing day. We arranged and rearranged our display a dozen times, debating the placement of each plant, the balance of colors, the way the light would fall across the petals. Mr. Whitmore brought in an assistant, a young gardener named Thomas who had an artist's eye for composition, and together the three of us created something that took my breath away. But as the exhibition drew closer, I began to hear more about Lady Genevieve's preparations, and my confidence wavered. The whispers grew more excited, more specific. She had spent a fortune on her display. She had commissioned a special platform designed by an architect. She had imported moss from Scotland and rare ferns from Wales to create the perfect backdrop. Her orchids were the finest anyone had ever seen, cultivated with such skill that the Royal Horticultural Society had already inquired about purchasing cuttings for their own collections. And then, 1 week before the exhibition, I received a visitor. I was in the morning room, reviewing the final plans for our display, when the butler announced that Lady Cavendish had called and was requesting an audience. My first instinct was to refuse, to send word that I was indisposed, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was that spark of anger that had been burning steadily brighter these past weeks. I wanted to see her, to look her in the eyes and not flinch away. "Show her in," I said. She entered the room like a queen entering her court, all grace and beauty and supreme confidence. Her dress was the latest fashion, a confection of rose silk that made her skin glow and her golden hair shimmer. She smiled at me warmly, and I felt my stomach clench with the old familiar dread. "Your Grace," she said, gliding forward to take my hands in hers. "How wonderful to see you. I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," I lied, extracting my hands as quickly as politeness allowed. "Please sit. Would you care for tea?" "How kind, but no, I cannot stay long. I merely wanted to call on you before the exhibition. I know you have been working on a display, and I wanted to wish you well." There was something in her tone that set my teeth on edge, a kind of patronizing sweetness that suggested she found my efforts adorable and futile. "Thank you," I said carefully. "That is very gracious of you." She settled into her chair with practiced elegance, arranging her skirts just so. "I must confess," she continued, "I was surprised to hear you were participating. You have always seemed so private, so withdrawn from society. I did not realize you had such an interest in flowers." "I have always loved flowers," I said. "Perhaps I have simply been too busy with other duties to pursue the interest publicly before now." "Of course," she said, her smile never wavering. "The duties of a duchess are so demanding." Though I must say, having been married myself, I found that one makes time for the things that truly matter. My late husband always encouraged my horticultural pursuits. He understood that a woman of quality must have accomplishments to display alongside her beauty and breeding. The implication was clear. I lacked both beauty and breeding, and therefore needed accomplishments even more desperately. I felt my face grow hot, but I kept my expression neutral. "I am fortunate to have such excellent resources at Harrogate," I said. "The conservatory contains some truly remarkable specimens." Her eyes sharpened slightly, a predator catching the scent of potential prey. "Oh yes, I have heard about the conservatory. The previous Duchess was quite the gardener, was she not? Though I understand much of her collection has fallen into neglect since her passing." "It was neglected for a time," I said, feeling that anger burn hotter now. "But I have been working to restore it, with excellent results." "How lovely," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "Well, I am sure your display will be quite charming. Perhaps you might even win one of the smaller categories. The judges do like to encourage newcomers." "I will be satisfied with presenting the best display possible," I said, my voice tight. "The judges will award prizes as they see fit." She stood then, smoothing her skirts. "Well, I must be going. So much still to prepare. I do hope you will come see my display, Your Grace. I have something truly special planned, something I have been cultivating for years with the help of someone whose taste and judgment I deeply trust." The implication was unmistakable. She was speaking of my husband, of their private collaboration, of the relationship that everyone knew about and no one discussed. She was telling me, in the most polite and vicious way possible, that she had claimed him, and that there was nothing I could do about it. I stood as well, my hands clenched in my skirts. "I am certain your display will be very impressive, Lady Cavendish. You have always been so accomplished." She smiled at me then, and there was triumph in that smile, a certainty that she had won before the battle had even truly begun. "You are very kind, Your Grace. I shall look forward to seeing you at the exhibition." After she left, I stood alone in the morning room, shaking with rage and something that felt dangerously close to despair. What was I thinking, believing I could challenge her? She had everything I did not: beauty, breeding, confidence, and most importantly, my husband's devotion. My display, no matter how carefully prepared, would be seen as exactly what she had suggested, a charming effort by a woman trying desperately to be something she was not. I went to the conservatory, seeking the comfort I always found there, and found Mr. Whitmore working on the final adjustments to our display. He looked up as I entered, and something in my face must have betrayed my distress, because his expression grew concerned. "Your Grace, are you well?" "Lady Cavendish called on me," I said, and my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "She wanted to wish me luck with the exhibition." "I see," he said slowly. "And did her good wishes bring you comfort?" Despite everything, I felt a small laugh escape me, bitter and sharp. "No," I said, "they did not. She made it very clear that she expects me to fail, that everyone expects me to fail." Mr. Whitmore set down his tools and looked at me directly, his weathered face serious. "Your Grace," he said, "I have known you for 5 years now. In that time, I have watched you survive things that would have broken a lesser woman. You have endured loneliness and isolation and humiliation, and you have done it with grace and dignity. But survival is not the same as living. These past weeks, working on this display, I have seen you come alive again. I have seen the woman you were meant to be, the woman you still are underneath all the weight of expectation and disappointment. Do not let Lady Cavendish or anyone else take that away from you. I felt tears well in my eyes, hot and sudden. But what if she is right? I whispered. What if I am simply fooling myself, playing at being something I can never be? Then at least you will have played, he said gently. At least you will have tried. That is more than most people can say. And between you and me, Your Grace, our display is magnificent. The blue orchids alone would be enough to win the grand prize. Everything else is simply perfection added to perfection. I looked at the arrangement before me, seeing it through his eyes, and felt something shift inside me once more. He was right. It was magnificent. We had created something beautiful, something worthy of pride, regardless of what anyone else thought or said. And more than that, we had created it together, out of determination and skill and a refusal to accept invisibility. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore, I said, wiping my eyes, for everything. He nodded, returning to his work. The exhibition is in 4 days, Your Grace. We will be ready. I spent those final days in a state of nervous anticipation, sleeping poorly, eating less, my mind consumed with 1,000 details and worries. My husband left for London 2 days before the exhibition, claiming business matters that required his attention, though I suspected he was actually going to help Lady Genevieve with her final preparations. I did not ask. I was beyond caring what excuses he offered. The night before the exhibition, I could not sleep at all. I rose and dressed in the darkness, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders, and went down to the conservatory. The moon was full, casting silver light through the glass walls, and our display sat in the center of the space like a jewel in a crown. The blue orchids seemed to glow in the moonlight, their color even more striking in the dimness, and I stood before them, feeling something I had not felt in years. I felt ready. Tomorrow, I would walk into that exhibition hall and face all of society with my head held high. Tomorrow, I would show them all that Eleanor Ashford, the country girl who became a duchess, was not someone to be dismissed or pitied or ignored. Tomorrow, I would take what was mine and refuse to apologize for it. But there was something else I needed to do first. Something that had been forming in my mind these past weeks as I worked on the display and remembered who I used to be. I needed to stop being afraid. I needed to stop accepting the scraps of dignity that others chose to throw me. And I needed to make a statement that could not be misunderstood or dismissed. I left the conservatory and went to my chambers, where I sat at my writing desk and began to compose a letter. My hand shook slightly as I wrote, but my words were clear and firm. When I was finished, I sealed the letter and set it aside. I would send it in the morning, before we left for London. Then I went to my wardrobe and began selecting what I would wear to the exhibition. Not one of my usual subdued gowns in dove gray or pale blue. The colors I had learned were appropriate for a duchess who wanted to fade into the background. Instead, I chose a dress of deep emerald silk that I had ordered months ago but never worn, too afraid of calling attention to myself. It was beautiful and bold, cut in the latest fashion, the color making my dark hair seem richer and my pale skin luminous. I would wear this dress tomorrow. I would wear my grandmother's emeralds, the only jewelry I owned that had not been chosen by my husband's family. And I would carry with me the most precious thing in our entire display, the thing that would complete my statement and ensure that no one would ever dismiss me again. I would carry Lady Genevieve's most prized possession, taken with perfect justification and presented to the world as mine. Because earlier that afternoon, while she had been sitting in my morning room telling me how charming my little display would be, Mr. Whitmore had been at Cavendish Hall, where my husband was supervising the loading of Lady Genevieve's orchids for transport to London. And in the controlled chaos of servants and crates and careful packaging, no one had noticed when Thomas, our young assistant gardener, had carefully removed a single magnificent cluster of Dendrobium noble, white with purple throats, and spirited it away in his coat. It was theft, pure and simple. It was beneath a duchess, beneath anyone with honor or morals. And I did not care. For 5 years, I had been honor and morals and dignity. And what had it gotten me? A cold house and a distant husband and a place in society as the object of pity and subtle mockery. Tomorrow, I would show them all what happened when you pushed a quiet woman too far. Tomorrow, I would enter that exhibition wearing Genevieve's orchids like a crown. The morning of the exhibition dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect June day that London so rarely offered. I stood at my window in our townhouse, watching the city come alive below me, and felt my heart beating hard against my ribs. Today was the day I would either triumph or be destroyed, and I found that I no longer cared which outcome prevailed. I only cared that I would be seen. My maid helped me dress with trembling hands. She was new to my service, having replaced the previous girl only a month ago, and she seemed terrified of doing something wrong. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that nothing she could do would make this day worse or better than it was already destined to be. But I remained silent, letting her work. The emerald silk whispered against my skin as she fastened the tiny buttons up my back. And when I finally looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I looked like someone who mattered. The dress transformed me, made me look taller, more commanding, more present somehow. My dark hair was swept up in an elegant arrangement, tendrils curling softly around my face. The emeralds at my throat caught the light, deep green fire that matched my gown. I looked like a duchess, not in the pale, fading way I had cultivated these past 5 years, but in the way the word was meant to convey. Power, grace, authority. And then there was the bouquet. Mr. Whitmore had prepared it himself that morning, arriving before dawn to cut the dendrobium at their peak. The orchids were breathtaking, their white petals pristine and luminous, the purple throats adding just enough color to make them striking without being gaudy. He had bound them with silk ribbon in the same emerald green as my dress, and added a few sprigs of delicate fern for texture. The arrangement was simple but magnificent, the kind of bouquet that would make people stop and stare. It was also unmistakably Lady Genevieve's signature creation. She had cultivated these exact orchids for years, had won prizes with them, had shown them to select members of society in private viewings. Anyone who knew anything about horticulture would recognize them instantly, and everyone would wonder how the Duchess of Harrogate had come to carry them. "Are you certain about this, Your Grace?" Mr. Whitmore asked quietly as he handed me the bouquet. "There will be consequences." "I am certain," I said, and my voice was steady. "Whatever consequences come, I will face them." He nodded, something like pride in his weathered face. "Then good luck, Your Grace. Though I do not think you will need it, you have already won, simply by refusing to disappear." His words stayed with me as the carriage carried me through London streets toward the Horticultural Society gardens. The exhibition was being held in the magnificent glass pavilion, a cathedral of iron and crystal that housed some of the finest botanical displays in the world. As we approached, I could see the crowds already gathering, ladies in their finest gowns and gentlemen in perfectly tailored coats, all come to see and be seen, to admire the flowers and judge each other with equal enthusiasm. My hands tightened on the bouquet. I could still turn back. I could have the driver take me home, could send word that I was ill, could hide in my rooms and pretend this day had never happened. No one would be surprised. It would be exactly what they expected from the quiet, unremarkable Duchess of Harrogate. But I was so tired of being expected. The carriage stopped, and the footman opened the door. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage like armor, and stepped out into the sunlight. The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. I heard my name whispered, heard the surprise and speculation rippling through the crowd like wind through grass. I kept my head high and my expression serene, exactly as I had been taught. But inside I was shaking with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I walked up the steps to the pavilion entrance, and that was when I saw Lady Genevieve. She was standing just inside the great doors, surrounded by admirers, her laughter bright and musical. She wore a gown of the palest pink silk, her golden hair crowned with a wreath of fresh flowers, looking like spring personified. She was holding court, as she always did, and everyone around her seemed to lean toward her like plants seeking the sun. She saw me at the same moment I saw her, and I watched her expression change. First there was polite recognition, the automatic smile she gave to social equals. Then her gaze dropped to the bouquet in my hands, and her face went absolutely white. She knew. Of course she knew. Those were her orchids, her prize specimens, the centerpiece of the display she had spent years cultivating, and I was carrying them as casually as if they were wildflowers picked from a meadow. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the crowded entrance hall. I saw shock in her eyes, and disbelief, and then something that looked almost like fear. She had not thought me capable of this. None of them had. "Your Grace," she said, and her voice was tight, strained. "What a lovely bouquet. Wherever did you acquire such remarkable orchids?" The crowd around us had gone silent, sensing drama, hungry for it. I could feel their eyes on me, feel their anticipation like a physical presence. This was the moment. I could lie, could make some vague excuse, could retreat into polite ambiguity. Or I could claim my power and refuse to apologize for it. "They are from Harrowgate's collection," I said clearly, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "We have been cultivating them for some time." I thought they deserved to be seen by a wider audience. It was not quite a lie. We had been cultivating them, just not these particular specimens. But the implication was clear. These orchids were mine, by right if not by origin, and I would not be questioned about them. Lady Genevieve's face had progressed from white to a mottled red, fury and humiliation warring in her expression. "Those orchids," she said, and her voice shook slightly, "are remarkably similar to ones I've been growing at Cavendish Hall. Almost identical, in fact." "How interesting," I said, my tone light and unconcerned. "I suppose great minds think alike when it comes to cultivation. Or perhaps we have been consulting the same horticultural references." I moved past her then, not waiting for her response, and the crowd parted to let me through. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of whispers, the shocked speculation, the delighted scandal. I had done it. I had walked into the heart of society and claimed my place, and there was nothing anyone could do to take it back. The exhibition hall was magnificent. Everywhere I looked, there were displays of extraordinary beauty, rare plants and exotic flowers arranged with artistic precision. But even in that sea of horticultural excellence, our display stood out. Mr. Whitmore had outdone himself. The blue orchids seemed to glow under the carefully arranged lighting, their impossible color drawing the eye immediately. The arrangement around them was perfection, each plant positioned to complement the others, creating a composition that was both harmonious and striking. And standing in front of it, staring at the blue orchids with an expression I could not quite read, was my husband. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment I saw genuine surprise on his face. He took in my appearance, the green dress, the emeralds, the bouquet in my hands, and something shifted in his expression. It was not quite recognition, but it was closer to actually seeing me than he had come in 5 years. "Eleanor," he said, and there was something in his voice I had never heard before. "You look well." "Thank you," I said coolly. "I'm glad you decided to attend after all." His gaze dropped to the bouquet, and I saw his eyes widen slightly. "Are those?" he began. then stopped. Where did those come from? From Harrogate, I said, the same answer I had given Lady Genevieve. Our conservatory has many treasures. I thought it was time we shared them with the world. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to work out what had happened. How I had come to possess orchids that looked exactly like the ones he had helped Genevieve prepare. I waited, curious to see what he would say, whether he would accuse me or question me or simply accept what I was telling him. But before he could speak, there was a commotion at the entrance to the hall. Lady Genevieve had arrived at our display, her face flushed with anger, her eyes blazing. She was followed by a small crowd of spectators, drawn by the promise of confrontation. "You," she said, pointing at me with a trembling finger, "you stole them. Those are my orchids. You had no right." I felt my husband stiffen beside me, felt the attention of everyone nearby focus on us with laser intensity. This was the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated, the moment when everything would come out into the open and there would be no more pretending, no more polite fictions. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Lady Cavendish," I said, my voice calm and clear. "These orchids came from Harrogate Manor. They are my property, as is everything in that conservatory." "You lie," she hissed, and her composure was cracking, the beautiful mask slipping to reveal the rage underneath. "I cultivated those exact specimens. I know every petal, every marking. They were prepared for my display, and now they are gone. You or your servants stole them." "Those are serious accusations," I said quietly. "Do you have any proof?" She sputtered, searching for words. "Everyone knows," she said finally. "Everyone knows these are mine." "What everyone knows," I said, and my voice was hard now, no longer polite, "is that you have spent years cultivating a reputation as the finest horticulturist in society. What everyone knows is that you have access to rare specimens and the skill to grow them. But what everyone also knows, Lady Cavendish, is that you are not the only person in England with a conservatory. You are not the only person with knowledge and resources, and you are certainly not the only person capable of growing Dendrobium nobile." The crowd murmured at this, heads nodding, seeing the logic, even if they suspected the truth. I pressed my advantage. "If these orchids look similar to yours, perhaps that is because we have been consulting similar sources. Perhaps we have purchased cuttings from the same suppliers. Or perhaps," I said, looking directly at my husband, "someone with knowledge of both our collections recognized the similarity and mentioned it to me. After all, His Grace visits Cavendish Hall frequently. It would be natural for him to notice such things." I watched my husband's face as I spoke, saw him pale, saw him realize what I was doing. I was not just defending myself against Genevieve's accusations. I was exposing their relationship, bringing it out into the open where it could no longer be whispered about in corners, but had to be acknowledged by everyone, including him. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and urgent, "this is not the place." "Is it not?" I said, turning to face him fully. "Then, where is the place, Charles? In your study, where you write her letters? In the drawing room, where you barely speak to me? In our bed, which you have not visited in 3 years? Where exactly is the appropriate place to discuss the fact that my husband has been conducting an affair with another woman for the entire duration of our marriage?" The crowd gasped, and I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God," in shocked delight. Lady Genevieve had gone pale again, her anger replaced by something that looked like panic. My husband stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and horror. I had done it. I had said the thing that could not be unsaid, had torn down the veil of propriety that had hidden their relationship from official acknowledgement. And I felt, in that moment, a kind of savage joy, the pleasure of finally being honest. "Your Grace," Lady Genevieve said, and her voice was shaking now, "you are hysterical. You do not know what you are saying." "I know exactly what I am saying," I replied. "I am saying that I am tired of being invisible. I am tired of pretending that everything is fine while you parade through society on the arm of my husband in all but name." I am tired of accepting crumbs of dignity while you feast on what should be mine. And I am saying that these orchids, whether you grew them or I grew them or someone else grew them entirely, are mine now. Because I claimed them. Because I had the courage to walk in here wearing them, knowing exactly what it would mean and not caring about the consequences. But the consequences, my husband said, and his voice was raw. Eleanor, do you understand what you have done? I understand perfectly, I said. I have told the truth, something neither of you has had the courage to do. Lady Genevieve looked between me and my husband, and I saw calculation in her eyes, saw her trying to determine how to salvage the situation. She was smart enough to know that direct confrontation would only make things worse, that acknowledging the affair publicly would ruin her as much as it would ruin him. Your Grace, she said finally, her voice cold and controlled now. I believe you are distraught. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, away from so many interested ears. There is nothing to discuss, I said. You wanted to humiliate me, to show everyone that you were superior in every way. You wanted to display your orchids and accept the admiration and know that you had won. But I have orchids too, beautiful ones. Ones that came from your collection or mine or somewhere else entirely. It hardly matters now. What matters is that everyone here sees them on me, sees that I am not someone to be dismissed or pitied or ignored. I turned then to face the crowd that had gathered around us, dozens of people watching this drama unfold with rapt attention. I raised the bouquet slightly, making sure everyone could see it clearly. These are Dendrobium nobile, I said, my voice carrying through the hall. White with purple throats, extraordinarily difficult to cultivate in England's climate. They require precise temperature control, specific humidity levels, and years of patient care. Whether they came from Cavendish Hall or Harrogate Manor, they are a testament to horticultural skill and dedication. And today, they are mine. There was silence for a moment, and then someone in the crowd began to clap. It was slow at first, almost hesitant, but then others joined in, and soon the applause was genuine and sustained. They were applauding the audacity, the drama, the sheer boldness of what I had done. And I stood there, holding my stolen bouquet, feeling my husband's horrified gaze on me and Lady Genevieve's murderous glare, and I smiled. I had won, not the way I had originally planned, with a display of superior horticulture and elegant restraint, but with theft and accusation and brutal honesty. I had won by refusing to play by their rules, by claiming what I wanted and daring them to stop me. The judges came by eventually, examining our display of blue orchids with professional interest. They made notes, asked questions which Mr. Whitmore answered with his usual unflappable calm. I stood nearby, still holding my controversial bouquet, and answered their inquiries with perfect courtesy. Yes, we had been cultivating these specimens for several years. Yes, they were remarkably rare. Yes, we were very proud of our conservatory's collection. When they moved on to Lady Genevieve's display, I did not follow. I had seen enough of her orchids for one day. Instead, I walked through the rest of the exhibition, admiring the other entries, engaging in polite conversation with people who approached me with new interest, as though I had suddenly become visible to them. Some looked scandalized, some looked amused, but all of them looked at me, really looked. And that was all I had wanted. Hours later, when the prizes were announced, our display of blue orchids won the grand prize for most exceptional specimen. Lady Genevieve's display won second place, which was still an honor, but not the triumph she had been expecting. I watched her accept her ribbon with a frozen smile, watched her eyes meet mine across the hall with pure hatred, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no victory. Just a strange emptiness where all my anger had been. My husband found me as the crowds were beginning to thin, as the afternoon light started to slant through the glass walls of the pavilion. He looked exhausted, older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Do we?" I asked. "I thought we were done talking 5 years ago." "Eleanor, please." "Not here. Come home with me. Let us discuss this properly." I looked at him, this man I had married and never known, and felt a crushing sadness wash over me. "Discuss what, Charles?" "The affair you have been having. The humiliation you have put me through. The marriage that never existed in any real sense. What exactly is there left to discuss?" "Everything," he said, and there was something almost desperate in his voice now. "I know I have failed you. I know I have been cruel and distant and everything a husband should not be. But please, give me a chance to explain, to make things right." "Make things right," I repeated, and I felt that familiar anger stirring again, pushing back the sadness. "You think there is a way to make this right? You think we can have some civilized conversation and suddenly everything will be fine? After 5 years of being ignored and humiliated and treated like an inconvenience, you think you can make it right?" "I do not know," he said honestly, "but I want to try. Today, seeing you like this, I realized something. I realized that I never actually saw you before. You were always just there, in the background, quiet and undemanding, and I took advantage of that. I took advantage of your patience and your dignity, and I am ashamed. But I want to do better, if you will let me." I looked at him, and I wanted desperately to believe him. I wanted to believe that something good could come from this disaster, that we could somehow salvage our marriage and build something real from the ashes. But I was also terrified, because hoping meant opening myself up to more hurt, and I was not sure I could survive another 5 years of disappointment. "I will come home," I said finally. "We will talk. But I am not promising anything, Charles. I am not promising forgiveness or reconciliation or a fresh start. I am only promising to listen, and in return, you will tell me the truth. All of it. About Genevieve, about why you married me, about everything." He nodded, relief and apprehension mixing on his face. "Thank you," he said. "That is more than I deserve." We rode back to the townhouse in silence, the stolen orchids resting in my lap, their white petals luminous in the fading light. I looked out the window at London passing by, at the people going about their ordinary lives, and I wondered what would happen next. Would we find a way to repair what had been broken, or would we simply continue the farce with a new set of rules? Would he really tell me the truth, or would I discover that some truths are too painful to speak aloud? I did not know. But for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I had a choice in my own life. I had stopped accepting whatever crumbs of dignity others chose to give me, had stopped making myself small and quiet and unobtrusive. I had claimed my space, had made them see me, and whether it led to redemption or destruction, at least it would be mine. The bouquet in my lap was already beginning to wilt slightly, the petals losing their perfect crispness. By tomorrow, it would be faded and drooping, a reminder of this strange, terrible, wonderful day when I had stolen what I wanted and refused to apologize. But today, in this moment, it was still beautiful. And so was I. We sat in his study, a room I had rarely entered during our marriage. It smelled of leather and tobacco and old books, masculine and foreign to me. He poured himself a brandy with shaking hands, offered me one which I declined, and then stood by the window looking out at the darkening street below. I waited, sitting in one of the leather chairs, my hands folded in my lap, the stolen orchids now residing in a vase on his desk between us like an accusation. "I do not know where to begin," he said finally, his voice low. "Begin with the truth," I said. "That is all I am asking for." He turned to face me then, and in the lamplight I could see how much this day had cost him. He looked older, more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. The Duke of Harrogate, always so composed and distant, was crumbling before my eyes. "I loved her," he said simply. "Genevieve. I loved her from the time we were children. Our families expected we would marry, and I wanted nothing more. She was everything to me, bright and beautiful and full of life. When her father arranged her marriage to Cavendish, it nearly destroyed me. I was 26 years old, and I had lost the only woman I had ever loved to a man who wanted her only for her bloodline and her face. He paused, drinking deeply from his glass. I did not speak, letting him find his way through the story. After she married, I could not bear to be in society. I withdrew to Harrogate, threw myself into managing the estate, tried to forget her. My mother was dying then, and she begged me to find a wife, to secure the succession. But I could not imagine marrying anyone, could not imagine giving to another woman what I had always believed belonged to Genevieve. So I refused. I told my mother I would marry when I was ready, and not before. Then Cavendish died, he continued, thrown from his horse during a hunt. Genevieve was 24 years old and a widow. I thought, finally, that we could be together. I went to her immediately, told her that I had never stopped loving her, asked her to marry me, and she refused. I felt something shift in my chest, surprise cutting through my anger. She refused. He laughed, a bitter sound. She told me that she had no intention of marrying again so soon after her husband's death. That society would judge her harshly if she appeared to have moved on too quickly. That she needed time to grieve and to establish herself as an independent woman of means. She said she cared for me deeply, that perhaps someday we might marry, but not yet, not for several years at least. So you married me instead, I said quietly. He nodded, shame written across his face. My mother's health was failing rapidly. She was desperate to see me married before she died, to know that the line would continue. And I was angry at Genevieve for refusing me, angry at fate for taking so long to give us a chance only to snatch it away again. So when my cousin suggested Eleanor Ashford, the daughter of a respectable family who would be grateful for the match, I agreed. I thought, in my arrogance and my hurt, that any wife would do, that it did not matter who I married, since I could not have the one I wanted. His words should have hurt more than they did, but I had suspected as much for years. Hearing him say it aloud was almost a relief, confirmation of what I had always known. Your mother died 2 months after our wedding, I said. Yes, he said, and I was left with a wife I did not love, and a title I had never wanted. I tried, Eleanor. I want you to know that I tried at first to be a decent husband. But every time I looked at you, I saw everything I had lost. You were kind and patient and trying so hard to please me, and all I could think was that you were not her, that you would never be her. So you went back to her, I said. Not immediately, he said. For the first year I kept my distance from Genevieve. I thought perhaps time and duty would help me accept my situation. But then she began appearing at social events again, and she was kind to me in a way she had never been before. She wrote to me, asking for advice about managing her estate. She invited me to visit Cavendish Hall to see her gardens, and I went, because I was lonely and miserable, and she was the only person who made me feel alive. And she encouraged you, I said. She drew you in. He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. She did. But I cannot blame her entirely. I wanted to be drawn in. I wanted to believe that she regretted refusing me, that perhaps we still had a chance. She never quite said it directly, but she implied it in 1,000 small ways. The way she looked at me, the way she touched my hand when we walked in her gardens, the way she spoke about how lonely she was in that big house all alone. But she never agreed to marry you, I said, understanding now. No, he admitted. Every time I brought it up, she had a reason why it was not yet the right time. Society would talk. Her late husband's family would be offended. She needed more time to establish her independence. There was always something. But she never ended our friendship either. She kept me close enough to hope, but far enough to never actually commit. Because she had exactly what she wanted, I said, and I heard the bitterness in my own voice. She had a wealthy widow's freedom, a grand estate of her own, and a duke who worshipped her, and would give her anything she asked for without demanding the duties of a wife in return. Why would she marry you when she already had everything you could offer? I saw him flinch at my words, saw the truth of them land like a blow. I did not see it, he said quietly, or I did not want to see it. I told myself that she loved me, that she was simply cautious, that eventually she would agree. And in the meantime, I neglected you utterly. I treated you with coldness and indifference because facing you meant facing my own failure, my own weakness. It was easier to avoid you than to acknowledge what I had done. I stood then, unable to sit still any longer. I walked to the window, looking out at the same view he had been studying earlier. The street was quiet now, the gas lamps casting pools of warm light on the cobblestones. "Did you know what she was saying about me?" I asked. "In society. The way she mocked my origins, my manners, my failure to give you an heir. Did you know about that?" "I heard some of it," he said, and his voice was heavy with guilt. "I should have defended you. I should have put a stop to it immediately. But I told myself that she did not mean it cruelly, that it was just social gossip, that you were strong enough to endure it. I was a coward, Eleanor. In every possible way, I was a coward." I turned to face him. And today, when I exposed everything in front of all those people, when I humiliated both of you publicly, did you finally see her clearly? He set down his glass and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration and despair. "Yes," he said, "I saw her very clearly. Do you know what she did after you left the exhibition? She did not ask if I was all right. She did not express concern about our marriage or what the scandal might mean for any of us. She was furious about the orchids. She screamed at me about how you had ruined her moment of triumph. How dare you steal from her, how I needed to force you to apologize publicly. It was all about her glory, her reputation, her victory. And I realized, standing there listening to her rage, that she had never loved me at all. She had loved having me as an admirer, as a resource, as someone who would provide her with attention and assistance without demanding anything real in return." "And what did you say to her?" I asked. "I told her that my marriage was my concern, not hers. I told her that perhaps it was time we both stopped pretending that our friendship was anything more than what it actually was, a habit we had fallen into because it was comfortable and familiar. And then I left. I came home to wait for you, to hope that you would give me a chance to explain and perhaps to start again." I looked at him standing there, this man I had married and never known, and I felt a complicated tangle of emotions I could not quite sort through. Anger, yes, still plenty of that, but also pity and sadness and a strange sort of recognition. We had both been trapped in this marriage, both made miserable by it, both too proud or too afraid to demand better. "Why did you never simply divorce me?" I asked. "If you were so unhappy, if I was such a disappointment, why not end the marriage and be free to pursue Genevieve properly?" He looked at me with something that might have been surprise. "Divorce," he said. "Eleanor, do you understand what divorce would mean? The scandal, the social consequences, the stain on both our families. And beyond that, I gave you my name, made you a Duchess. To divorce you would be to cast you out with nothing, to make you an outcast in society. I may have been a terrible husband, but I am not quite cruel enough for that." "How noble of you," I said, and I could not keep the sarcasm from my voice. To trap me in a loveless marriage for my own protection. "It was not just that," he said, and there was frustration in his voice now. "If I am being completely honest, I kept hoping that something would change, that I would stop loving Genevieve, or that you would do something to make me see you differently, or that time would somehow make this bearable. I kept thinking that perhaps we could find a way to coexist peacefully, to build some kind of partnership, even if it was not love. But I never put in the effort required to make that happen. I simply waited, like a coward, for fate to solve my problems for me. And today, I forced your hand," I said. I made it impossible for you to continue pretending everything was fine. Yes, he said, you did. And I am grateful for it, even though it was the most humiliating day of my life. Because it made me see clearly for the first time in years. It made me see what I have done to you, what I have done to both of us. I walked back to the chair and sat down, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the day was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. So what now, Charles? You have told me the truth. You have apologized. What do you want from me? I want to know if there is any possibility, he said slowly, that we might start over. Not go back to what we were, because that was broken from the beginning, but start fresh. Get to know each other as people, rather than as disappointed expectations. See if there might be something worth building between us. I studied his face, searching for signs of deception or false hope, but I saw only sincerity and a kind of desperate vulnerability. And why would I want that? I asked quietly. Why would I risk opening myself up to more hurt, more disappointment, more years of being second best? Because, he said, and he came to kneel beside my chair, taking my hands in his. I saw something extraordinary today. I saw a woman who refused to be invisible, who fought for her dignity and her place with courage and intelligence and absolute conviction. I saw the woman I married but never bothered to know. And I would very much like the chance to know her now, if she would permit it. His hands were warm around mine, and I felt tears prick my eyes, despite my determination not to cry. You cannot simply erase 5 years of neglect with pretty words, Charles. I know, he said, I know that. But perhaps we can start building something new. Small steps, getting to know each other, being honest with each other. I am not asking you to forgive me immediately or to trust me blindly. I am only asking for the chance to earn your forgiveness and your trust over time. I looked down at our joined hands, his larger and scarred from riding accidents, mine smaller and marked with the calluses I had developed from working in the conservatory. We were strangers who had lived together for 5 years, 2 people who had never bothered to see each other clearly. Could we really start over? Could we build something real from such damaged foundations? I do not know if I can love you, I said honestly. I do not know if that is even possible after everything that has happened. I do not know either, he said, but I would like to find out. And even if we never achieve love, perhaps we could at least achieve respect, friendship, partnership. That would be more than we have now. He was right about that. What we had now was nothing, less than nothing. It was an empty shell of a marriage that made us both miserable. Any change would be an improvement. All right, I said finally. We can try. But there will be conditions. Anything, he said. First, your relationship with Lady Genevieve ends completely. No more visits to Cavendish Hall, no more letters, no more private consultations about horticulture or anything else. If you see her in society, you will be polite but distant. You will not seek her out, and you will not respond if she seeks you out. Agreed, he said immediately. That is more than fair. Second, I said, we will take time to actually speak to each other. Every day, we will spend at least an hour together, talking. Not about estate business or social obligations, but about ourselves, our thoughts, our interests, our hopes. We will learn to know each other as we should have done from the beginning. I would like that, he said softly. And third, I said, taking a deep breath, you will tell me about your mother, about your childhood, about all the things that made you into the man you are. I want to understand you, Charles, not to excuse what you have done, but to understand it. And in return, I will tell you about my life, my family, the things that matter to me. We will start being honest with each other, completely honest, even when it is difficult. He nodded, and I saw relief in his eyes. Yes, he said, all of that. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for giving me this chance." He released my hands and stood, offering me his hand to help me up. I took it, feeling the strange intimacy of the gesture, and rose to stand beside him. We were nearly the same height, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the lines at the corners of his mouth that suggested he had once smiled more than he did now. "There is something else I need to tell you," he said. "Something about today that you should know." "What is it?" I asked, feeling a flutter of anxiety. "The orchids," he said, "the ones you carried. I knew immediately that they were Genevieve's. I had helped her prepare them for transport just the day before. When I saw them on you, I knew what you had done. And do you know what my first thought was?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "My first thought was that you were magnificent," he said. "Absolutely magnificent. Standing there in that green dress, holding those stolen flowers like a queen wearing a crown she had taken in conquest. I was appalled and horrified and proud all at the same time. Proud of my wife for having the courage to do what I never could, to claim what she wanted and refuse to apologize for it." I felt my throat tighten with emotion. "You should have been furious with me." "I was, a little," he admitted. "But mostly I was in awe. And I realized, watching you stand there and face down Genevieve and all of society, that I had married someone extraordinary. Someone strong and brave and absolutely unwilling to be broken. I had just been too blind to see it. I looked away, not sure how to respond to this, not sure if I could trust these words or the feelings they stirred in me. It is easy to say such things now, Charles, in the aftermath, when you have been caught and exposed and forced to face consequences. But where were these thoughts 5 years ago? Where were they a month ago? "They were there," he said quietly, "buried under my selfishness and my resentment and my stubborn refusal to let go of what I thought I wanted. But they were there, Eleanor, and I will spend as long as it takes proving to you that I mean what I say." We stood there in silence for a long moment, the lamplight casting our shadows on the wall, the stolen orchids wilting slowly on his desk. Then he did something I did not expect. He took my hand and brought it to his lips, kissing my knuckles gently, a gesture of respect and apology, and perhaps the beginning of something that might eventually resemble affection. "Thank you," he said again, "for not giving up on us entirely. For being willing to try." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Then I withdrew my hand and moved toward the door. "I need rest," I said. "It has been a very long day." "Of course," he said. "But Eleanor, one more thing." I turned back to look at him. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "would you join me for breakfast? Not in our separate rooms as we usually do, but together. We could begin our daily hour of conversation then, if you are willing." I felt something soften in my chest, something that might have been hope, or might have been fear, or might have been both. "Yes," I said, "I will join you for breakfast." His face lit up with a smile, genuine and warm, the first such smile I had seen from him in our entire marriage. It transformed him, made him look younger, more approachable, more like someone I might actually want to know. "Good," he said, "that is very good. Sleep well, Eleanor." I left the study and climbed the stairs to my chambers, my mind whirling with everything that had been said. My maid helped me undress, her hands gentle and careful, and I let her put me in my nightgown and brush out my hair without really being present. I was thinking about my husband's face when he had called me magnificent, about his promise to end his relationship with Genevieve, about the possibility of starting over. After my maid left, I went to the window and looked out at the night sky. Somewhere in this city, Lady Genevieve was probably still fuming about her lost orchids and her public humiliation. Somewhere, people were gossiping about the scandal at the exhibition, the shocking accusations I had made, the drama that would fuel conversation for weeks to come. And somewhere, in a conservatory at Harrogate Manor, Mr. Whitmore was probably tending to the blue orchids that had won us the grand prize, the beautiful rebellion that had changed everything. I had set out to make myself visible, to refuse to be dismissed or ignored. I had succeeded beyond my wildest imagination, but the cost had been steep. I had exposed my husband's affair, humiliated the woman who had tormented me, and stolen something that did not belong to me. I had acted with anger and desperation and a kind of reckless courage I did not know I possessed. And now I had to decide if any of it had been worth it, if the possibility of a real marriage with a husband who might actually see me was worth the scandal and the shame and the risk of being hurt again. I thought about the girl I had been 5 years ago, hopeful and naive, believing in happy endings. I thought about the woman I had become, quiet and invisible, slowly disappearing under the weight of disappointment. And I thought about who I might be tomorrow if I chose to keep fighting, to keep claiming my place in the world. I did not have answers yet, but for the first time in 5 years, I had questions that felt worth asking, and that, I thought, was something. I climbed into bed and closed my eyes, and I dreamed of orchids blooming in impossible colors, of conservatories filled with light, of a man's hand reaching for mine, not out of duty, but out of genuine desire to connect. They were only dreams, fragile and uncertain as morning mist, but they were mine. And tomorrow, I would wake up and go to breakfast with my husband, and we would begin the long, difficult work of learning to be honest with each other. We would tell our stories, share our truths, and see if there was any foundation upon which to build something real. I did not know if we would succeed. I did not know if love was possible between two people who had begun so badly. But I knew that I would try, because trying was better than accepting defeat, because fighting was better than disappearing, because I had stolen orchids and worn them like a crown, and I was not done claiming what was mine. The night was long and restless, full of half-waking thoughts and uncertain hopes. But when morning came, I rose with purpose, dressed carefully, and went downstairs to meet my husband for breakfast. And when I entered the dining room and saw him standing there waiting for me, his face anxious and hopeful and vulnerable, I felt something shift in my heart. It was not love, not yet, but it was possibility, and for now, that was enough. The rebuilding of a marriage, I learned, is not a single grand gesture, but 1,000 small ones. It is breakfast together every morning, even when conversation feels awkward and stilted. It is learning to share the silence without feeling the need to fill it. It is discovering, slowly and carefully, that the person you married is not who you thought they were, for better and for worse. Those first weeks after the exhibition were strange and difficult. London society buzzed with scandal, and we were the subject of every whispered conversation, every knowing glance. Some people cut us entirely, offended by my public accusations and the impropriety of airing private matters so spectacularly. Others found us fascinating, inviting us to dinners and parties specifically to observe the infamous Duchess and her humiliated Duke. We declined most invitations, choosing instead to remain in our townhouse and focus on the work of actually getting to know each other. Charles kept his promise about Lady Genevieve. She wrote to him twice in those first days, letters that he showed me before burning them, unread beyond the first few lines. She tried once to call on us, and he sent her away at the door with instructions never to return. I watched from the window as she climbed back into her carriage, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. She had thought. I realized that I would be the one to leave, that Charles would eventually tire of his guilty attempt at reconciliation and return to her. She had not counted on his stubbornness, or perhaps on his shame being powerful enough to override his old infatuation. But I was not naive enough to think that his ending things with Genevieve meant he suddenly loved me. Love, I was learning, was not a switch that could be flipped from one person to another. It was something that had to be built carefully over time, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, shared moment by shared moment. Our daily hours together became the scaffolding upon which we built. Charles told me about his childhood, about a mother who was cold and demanding, about a father who died when he was 12 and left him to shoulder responsibilities he was not ready for. He told me about the loneliness of being a young duke, about the way people always wanted something from him, about how Genevieve had been the one person who seemed to see him rather than his title. I began to understand why he had clung to her so desperately, why he had been unable to let go, even when the relationship was clearly one-sided and ultimately destructive. In turn, I told him about my own childhood, about the warmth and laughter of my modest home, about parents who loved each other genuinely and had taught me to believe that marriage should be a partnership of equals. I told him about the shock of entering his world, about feeling constantly judged and found wanting, about the slow death of hope that had occurred over our 5 years together. I told him things I had never told anyone, about the nights I had cried myself to sleep, about the moments when I had considered simply leaving and returning to my family in disgrace. He listened to all of it with a kind of horrified attention, and I saw him truly comprehend, perhaps for the first time, what his neglect had cost me. There were times when he wept, when the weight of his guilt became too much to bear. I did not comfort him in those moments. I let him feel the full measure of what he had done, because that was part of the honesty we had promised each other. But there were other moments too, better ones. Moments when we discovered unexpected commonalities, shared interests that had been buried under years of mutual avoidance. We both loved history, it turned out, and spent several evenings reading aloud to each other from books about the Roman Empire and the medieval period. We both had a dry sense of humor that emerged when we felt safe enough to express it. We both loved music, though neither of us had exceptional talent for playing. And we both, I discovered with some surprise, had been equally miserable in our marriage. He had not been happier than I was, simply more skilled at hiding his unhappiness behind duty and distance. This realization changed something for me. I had spent so long thinking of myself as the victim and him as the villain, but the truth was more complicated. We had both been victims of a system that valued property and bloodlines over compatibility and affection, both been trapped in a situation neither of us had wanted. 6 weeks after the exhibition, we received an official letter from the Royal Horticultural Society. Our display of blue orchids had not only won the grand prize, but the Society was requesting permission to study and potentially propagate specimens from our collection. It was a tremendous honor, one that would cement Harrogate's reputation in horticultural circles for generations. Charles brought the letter to me at breakfast, a smile on his face. "They want to visit the conservatory next month," he said. "They are sending 3 of their top botanists." "This is extraordinary, Eleanor." "It is," I agreed, feeling a glow of pride. "Mr. Whitmore will be thrilled." He set the letter down and looked at me seriously. "This is your achievement," he said. "You and Mr. Whitmore." I had nothing to do with it. "That is not entirely true," I said. "Those orchids were cultivated by your mother. The conservatory exists because of your family's investment in horticulture over generations. And besides, we are married. Your achievements are mine, and mine are yours. That is how this is supposed to work." He reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture that had become more natural over these weeks, but still sent a small thrill through me each time. "You are very generous," he said. "More generous than I deserve." "I am learning to be honest," I corrected him. "There is a difference." We decided to return to Harrogate Manor for the Society's visit, eager to leave London and its gossip behind. The journey was different this time, without the oppressive silence that had characterized our previous travels. We talked about the estate, about improvements we might make, about plans for expanding the conservatory. Charles suggested we hire an assistant for Mr. Whitmore, someone younger who could learn from his expertise and eventually take over when he retired. I proposed starting a garden club for the local women, sharing our resources and knowledge with the community. These conversations felt natural, easy, like something we should have been doing all along, and I realized that we were finally building what we should have built from the beginning, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's lives. Harrogate Manor welcomed us home like an old friend. The summer gardens were in full bloom, roses and lavender and foxglove creating a riot of color and fragrance. Mr. Whitmore met us at the conservatory, his weathered face creased with satisfaction when we told him about the society's visit. "They will want to see everything," he said. "The blue orchids especially, but also the cattleya and the phalaenopsis. We should prepare a comprehensive catalogue of the collection." Over the next few days, we threw ourselves into preparation. Charles surprised me by being genuinely helpful, his knowledge of botany deeper than I had realized. He had learned a great deal during his visits to Genevieve's gardens, and now he was putting that knowledge to use for our own estate. We worked side by side, Charles, Mr. Whitmore, Thomas, and myself, cataloging every specimen, checking every plant for signs of disease or stress, arranging the conservatory to show our collection at its absolute best. It was during one of these work sessions that Charles said something that changed everything. We were alone in the conservatory, the late afternoon sun slanting through the glass walls, and he was helping me repot a delicate orchid. His hands were gentle but confident, and I watched him work with a kind of wonder, seeing him engaged and present in a way I had never witnessed before. "I love this," he said suddenly, "working with you like this, being part of something rather than just managing from a distance. I feel more useful, more alive than I have in years." "I am glad," I said softly. He set down the pot and turned to face me fully. "Eleanor," he said, and there was something in his voice that made my heart beat faster. "I need to tell you something. Something I realized yesterday when we were going through the plant records." "What is it?" I asked. "I am in love with you," he said simply. "Not the idea of you, not duty or obligation or guilt. You, the woman who steals orchids and wears them like weapons. The woman who speaks her mind and refuses to disappear. The woman who works in a conservatory until her hands are dirty and her hair is falling out of its pins. The real you. I am in love with her." I stared at him, unable to speak, feeling tears gather in my eyes. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup my face gently. "I know I have no right to expect you to feel the same way," he continued. "I know that I have hurt you too deeply, for too long. But I wanted you to know. I wanted to be honest, as we promised. And I want you to know that whether you ever love me back or not, I will spend the rest of my life proving that I mean these words, that I am worthy of the second chance you have given me." The tears spilled over then, running down my cheeks, and I saw panic flash across his face. "Eleanor," he said, "I am sorry. I should not have said anything. It is too soon." "No," I said, finding my voice. "It is not that. It is just that I have wanted to hear those words for so long. For 5 years I wanted nothing more than for you to see me, to care about me, to love me. And now that you have said it, I do not know what to do with it." "You do not have to do anything," he said gently. "You do not have to say it back. You do not have to feel anything you do not feel. I am simply telling you the truth." I looked up at him, at this man who had been a stranger and an enemy, and was slowly becoming something else entirely. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability, the fear that I would reject him. And I realized that I had a choice to make. I could protect myself, could hold back, could wait until I was absolutely certain before offering my heart. Or I could take a risk, could be as brave in love as I had been in rebellion, could trust that what we were building was strong enough to support the weight of hope. "I am not sure I am in love with you yet," I said honestly, "but I think I could be. I think I am already halfway there. You make me laugh, Charles. You listen to me. You work beside me without complaint. You have become someone I look forward to seeing each morning, and that is more than I ever thought we would have." His face lit up with such joy that it transformed him utterly. "That is enough," he said. "More than enough. We will build the rest together as slowly as we need to." Then he did something he had not done since our wedding night. He kissed me. But this kiss was nothing like that awkward, perfunctory joining. This was tender and questioning and full of restrained passion. His lips moved against mine gently, asking permission, waiting for response. And I gave it, kissing him back, feeling something ignite in my chest that might have been desire, or might have been the beginning of love, or might have been both. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard, and I saw wonder in his eyes. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he said, "but I was afraid you would not welcome it." "I might not have, a few weeks ago," I admitted, "but now I think I would be disappointed if you never tried." He laughed then, a sound of pure happiness, and pulled me close. We stood there in the conservatory surrounded by growing things, holding each other, and I felt something settle in my soul. This was what I had been seeking all along, not grand passion or fairy tale romance, but simple, genuine connection. Two people learning to see each other clearly and choosing to stay together anyway. The Society's visit was a tremendous success. The three botanists spent 2 full days examining our collection, taking copious notes and expressing admiration for everything they saw. The blue orchids particularly impressed them, and they made arrangements to purchase several cuttings for propagation. Mr. Whitmore beamed with pride, and even Thomas, usually so quiet, could not hide his satisfaction. Charles and I hosted a small dinner for the botanists on their last evening, and I found myself enjoying the conversation immensely. These were people who shared my passion for horticulture, who saw beauty and value in cultivation and care. They treated me as an equal, asking my opinion, valuing my knowledge, never once suggesting that my contributions were less important because I was a woman. After they left, Charles and I walked through the gardens in the late evening light. We had fallen into the habit of these evening walks, using the time to talk about our days, to share our thoughts, to simply be together without the pressure of trying too hard. "You were magnificent tonight," he said, "the way you discussed cultivation techniques with Professor Harrington." I was in awe. "I enjoy talking about things I am passionate about," I said. "It is easier to be confident when you truly know your subject." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I received a letter today. From Genevieve." I felt a cold spike of anxiety. What did it say? He pulled the letter from his pocket and handed it to me. "Read it yourself," he said. "I have no secrets from you." I unfolded the paper with trembling hands and read the elegant script. It was not what I expected. There was no pleading, no anger, no attempt to rekindle their relationship. Instead, it was a kind of farewell. She wrote that she understood he had made his choice, that she wished him well, that she hoped he would find the happiness he deserved. And then, in the final paragraph, something that made my throat tighten. "I confess that I never loved you as you deserved to be loved. You were comfort and attention and the pleasure of being admired, but I never saw you clearly. I was too focused on what I wanted, on maintaining my position and my freedom, to consider what you needed. Your wife has shown me something important about courage and honesty, even if her methods were rather dramatic. Perhaps we are both better off learning to build our lives without each other. I wish you joy, Charles. Truly." I folded the letter carefully and handed it back to him. "That was gracious of her," I said, "more gracious than I expected." "She is not entirely heartless," he said, "simply selfish. But perhaps this experience has taught her something as well, just as it has taught me." "What has it taught you?" I asked. "That love without honesty is worthless," he said. "That passion without partnership is empty. That the most beautiful thing in the world is not a perfect face or impeccable breeding, but a person who sees you clearly and chooses to stay anyway." We walked in silence for a while, and then he said, "Eleanor, there is something I want to ask you." "What is it?" "Would you consider renewing our vows?" he said. "Not a large ceremony, just us and a priest, and perhaps Mr. Whitmore as witness. A private moment where we can commit to each other again, but this time with full knowledge of what we are promising. A real marriage instead of the hollow one we began with. I stopped walking and looked up at him. "You want to marry me again? I never truly married you the first time," he said. "Not in any way that mattered. I want to do it properly now. I want to stand before God and promise to love and honor and cherish you, and mean every word, if you will have me." I felt tears gather in my eyes again, but these were different from the bitter tears I had shed so many times before. These were tears of joy, of relief, of hope, finally fulfilled. "Yes," I said, "I will marry you again, Charles, properly this time." He pulled me into his arms and held me close, and I felt the steady beat of his heart against my cheek. We stood there as the sun set over Harrowgate's gardens, two people who had found their way to each other through scandal and theft and brutal honesty. And I felt something I had never felt in this place before. I felt at home. The ceremony took place a month later in the small chapel on the estate. It was simple and private, just as Charles had promised. Mr. Whitmore stood as our witness, his eyes damp with emotion. The local vicar, who had known Charles since childhood, performed the service with warmth and sincerity. This time, when I made my vows, I meant them. I promised to love and honor Charles, to stand beside him as a true partner, to build a life together based on honesty and mutual respect. And when he made his vows to me, I heard the difference in his voice, the certainty and commitment that had been absent the first time. When it was finished, when we were declared husband and wife again, he kissed me with tenderness and joy. And I kissed him back, no longer the frightened girl who had married a stranger, but a woman who knew her own worth and had chosen to give her heart to someone who had earned it. That night, for the first time in our marriage, we came together not out of duty, but out of genuine desire. It was awkward at first, tentative, both of us learning each other's bodies and preferences. But it was also beautiful and real and completely ours. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, I felt a completeness I had never experienced before. "I love you," I said quietly, surprising myself. The words had slipped out unbidden, but once spoken, I realized they were true. Somehow, in these months of rebuilding and learning and growing together, I had fallen in love with my husband. He tightened his arms around me. "I love you too," he said, "more than I thought possible. Thank you for not giving up on us." "Thank you for being worth the effort," I replied. The scandal gradually faded, as scandals always do. New dramas emerged to capture society's attention, and we became old news. Some people never fully forgave us for our public display, but many others came to respect us for our honesty. We were known as the Duke and Duchess of Harrowgate, who had saved their marriage by refusing to pretend any longer, and that gave us a kind of odd credibility. Lady Genevieve remarried within the year, to an elderly earl with more money than sense. I heard she was miserable, but well compensated for her misery. I felt a flicker of pity for her, but mostly I felt grateful. Grateful that I had not become like her, bitter and alone despite being surrounded by admirers, choosing comfort over connection. Mr. Whitmore continued to work in the conservatory for another 5 years before age finally forced him to retire. We hired his nephew as replacement, and Mr. Whitmore spent his final years teaching the boy everything he knew. He lived to see our conservatory become one of the finest in England, regularly featured in horticultural journals and visited by botanists from around the world. When he died, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, we buried him in the estate cemetery with full honors. I placed blue orchids on his grave, and I wept for the man who had helped me find my courage. Charles and I never had children. We tried, but it simply did not happen, and eventually we accepted it. Instead, we poured our energy into the estate, into the conservatory, into each other. We traveled together, visiting botanical gardens across Europe. We established a scholarship for young women interested in horticulture. We grew old together, watching the seasons change, watching the orchids bloom and fade and bloom again. Now, sitting in the conservatory at the age of 63, I look back on that day at the flower exhibition, and I marvel at my younger self's courage. She did not know how things would turn out. She had no guarantee that her bold gesture would lead to anything but more pain and humiliation. But she did it anyway, because she refused to disappear, because she demanded to be seen. The stolen orchids changed everything. They were the catalyst that forced us to be honest, to tear down the comfortable lies we had been living behind. Without them, Charles and I might have continued our cold, distant marriage until death finally released us. Instead, we got something better. We got a real marriage, built on foundation of truth and earned through hard work and forgiveness. The blue orchids still bloom every spring, as magnificent as ever. I tend them myself now, my hands older and less steady, but still capable. And sometimes, when the light falls just right through the glass walls, I remember that day I stood before all of society, wearing my enemy's flowers like a crown. I remember the fear and the anger and the desperate courage it took to claim my place. And I smile, because that woman, that brave, foolish, magnificent woman, was me, is me, will always be me. The Duchess of Harrogate, who stole what she wanted and built a life worth living from the ashes of disappointment. The flowers bloom, the seasons turn, and I am here, seen and loved, and utterly, completely myself. That is all I ever wanted. That is everything.